question, of which I know kept everyone in suspense and certainly was a surprise. Nevertheless, I was hoping that many of you would have given thought to the question, because I believe that the questions I raised, and I will shortly repeat them again, really defines for us the age of Aquarius and what that will mean ultimately for us. In chapter 10 of Numbers, Beha'alotcha, where it says in verse 29, and Moses said unto Chovav, his father-in-law, another name for Yitro or Jethro, Nosim anachnu el hamakom asher amar Hashem. We are now journeying unto the place, to that place which Lord has said he will give unto us, and therefore come thou with us, and we will do thee good. For the Lord hath spoken good concerning Israel. Here's Moses pleading with his father-in-law, who had already become a convert, to please journey with him. And the response of Jethro was, I will not go, but I will depart to my own land, to my own kindred. And then again, in verse 31, along comes Moses and says, I pray thee, do not leave us. For as much as thou knowest how we are encamped in this wilderness, and please be to us eyes, direct us. And there is no response from Jethro this time. And in fact, Moses continues to say that if you will go with us, all of the good that has been promised us will also benefit you. And that's where the subject ends. And so we raised the following questions. Firstly, why didn't Jethro go with Moses? He was asking him, and then he turns around and says, no, I want to go back home. He was now already a convert. And wasn't he expecting to enter the land of Israel? Meaning that if he was a convert, and we know that the difference between the Jew and the non-Jew is essentially the difference between the desire to receive in its intensity, where a Jew on Mount Sinai underwent a transformation, a new creation called Jew, which heretofore did not exist as a nation, and that was the most intensified desire to receive that could become manifest by humankind. And consequently, when Yitro became a ger, he then was considered to be within the congregation of Israel. And so why didn't he agree to the request of Moses? And furthermore, what was Moses' plea a second time, upon which there is suddenly an abrupt halt to the subject, no response from Jethro, nothing further said, other than the verse, which is verse 33, and they set forward from the mount of the Lord 3 days, And the Ark of the Covenant went before them to seek out a resting place for them. Indeed, a mystery. The commentaries on this particular subject ask the questions we have raised. And the only explanation that seems to come to my mind is something that we read in the portion of the week, which was Shlach Lecha, which was last week, which we did not discuss, and I want to spend some time because the questions we raised are directly linked to what happened in the following portion of the week, which concerns the spies that went to Israel to investigate whether the land was the right place for them or not. And so I want to read from the Zohar for the obvious reason that this will raise our own consciousness, and whatever is being said here this evening will be understood on a higher level of understanding rather than our usual mundane consciousness. Tochazi, Zohar says, come and see. Eliezer Eved Avraham ibnei Canaan haya. If you recall that Abraham had a servant whose name was Eliezer, and when Abraham sought a bride for his son Isaac, he sent his trusted servant Eliezer, who was from the nation of Canaan, and the Zohar continues, there was a curse on Canaan, she'arur Canaan eved avadim yeh la'achiv. But because, continues the Zohar, mishum shehaya shliach ne'eman, and because this non-Jew was a trusted servant, what does it say? Ma katuv bo Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem mamash. He was blessed by Hashem. V'al kein nechtav b'Torah mishum sheyatsa miklala hazu, and because he was a trusted servant, he went out of this curse, v'nidbarech, and he was blessed. And the Zohar continues, v'lo dailo, and it is not sufficient, sheyatsa miklala, that he simply went out of this curse, which was a blessing by and within itself, ela shenidbarech b'shmo shel akadosh baruch hu, v'lamadati sheba malach v'hichnis davar zeh, dahainu sheyikru Baruch Hashem b'piv shel Lavan. Who gave him the blessing? Who said Baruch Hashem, that you should be blessed by Hashem? Lavan, the individual about whom we learn in the Agadah that his intent was to destroy the very seed of Israel, to destroy Jacob, and consequently there would be no Israel. Within this one little verse of the Zohar lies, I believe, the answer to the mystery of what Jethro was all about. What did the fact of being a trusted servant, whose duty it was to be a trusted servant, that this in turn brought about that Laban, the arch enemy of Israel, would be the channel by which he would be blessed. Why couldn't he be blessed by Abraham? The Lord needed Laban to bless Eliezer. In another case, we have, which is further on in Numbers, the famous prayer. In fact, the first prayer that all Jews recite upon entering a synagogue or a Bet HaKnesset is Matovu Lecha Yaakov. How goodly are the tents of Jacob. And who was the author of that phrase? Another arch enemy of Israel, who openly came to curse the people of Israel, that was Bilam. And through him came the blessing of Matovo Lecha Yaakov, that to this very day the sages sought fit in the prayer book to insert this blessing of Bilam. Why was it required? Or what was the necessity of using a non-Jew to provide the blessing, as if it couldn't come through Abraham? Or couldn't it have come through Moses, who was there at the time? Why was it necessary that these people act as channels? And the Zohar says this in many areas, that because these people were essentially non-Jewish, and consequently, while being Jewish is not necessarily evil, despite the fact that the Bible certainly makes a very deep impression upon anyone reading the Bible, that the Jews there could be no nation worse than the Jews, because we have discussed it time and time again, as we will again in this week's portion, that they never stop. In other words, what did you do for me today? Immediately following the 10 plagues, the Jew says, what did you do for me today, God? They cross the Red Sea, splitting of the Red Sea. The next day is, what are you doing for me today, God? Forgetting immediately. And in this week's portion again. In fact, when Moshe asked Jethro to be the eyes of Israel, it followed a similar incident where they were complaining about, the wonderful fish in Egypt. This was on these people's minds. A very bad description of the nation of Israel, and a very bad description of the people who are going to exemplify and be the channel for this beautiful teaching called the Torah. So we're thoroughly convinced that while the Jew could have the potential of reaching heights of consciousness, the level of which no other nation could reach, but they seem to be doing a bad job of it. And the track record, not only contained within the Torah, but the track record of the last 2,000 years, again spells out the same pattern. The Jew never changes. He is always finding someone else to blame for his problems. He is always finding fault with whatever situation he finds himself. And yet we are to be considered the nation of God. Which leads us to an answer or a comprehension of what the Zohar is trying to reveal for us. While Laban or Bilam had evil intentions, but with that kind of a channel, the Lord did not find any difficulty in channeling his energy. It was simple. And in fact, we know the reason he chose the Jew to be the channel, because wherever there could be the lowest of desire to receive, or shall I say the greediest form of desire to receive, so therein lies the opportunity of achieving a desire to receive for the sake of sharing to the greatest degree. However, that aspect of the desire to receive for oneself alone always accompanies whatever action the Jew does, because it begins initially and essentially with a desire to receive, for the reason that 7 people changed the face of this world, or the face of the earth. So we are told, 7 people. Those 7 people were all Jews. And it is not by coincidence that they were Jews. They were channels. Whether they were channels for what some might consider to be evil, and in my particular case, in reference to Einstein, I didn't believe that his changing the face of the earth, which was radical, which was something that didn't exist before, nevertheless, it brought more problems than it has brought the euphoria that we're all looking for, this beautiful state of peace and tranquility. It's brought waste, it's brought everything, and I'm referring to the splitting of the atom. The non-Jew, because he does not have that kind of intensity of desire to receive, while in effect he could transform that desire to receive for sharing, but nevertheless, the fact that he makes use of its sharing does not preclude that the desire to receive for oneself alone is not present. It always remains present. The question is, what does the Jew do with it? While he has failed dismally is one side of the picture. The fact that he would be successful, let's say like Moshe or Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, doesn't preclude that these individuals did not have that kind of desire to receive. And therefore, when Moshe requested Jethro to be the eyes, what he was in effect saying, it's true that a non-Jew does not have that kind of intensity and therefore cannot draw that kind of energy. But he was a convert. Jethro was a convert. And the fact that he was a convert meant that he kept all of the assets, all of the positivities of a non-Jew, along with this new negativity that he was going to acquire. So whereas one who is born Jewish could possibly reach a higher level of consciousness of which no other nation could achieve, nevertheless, that spark of desire to receive for oneself alone could turn the whole table, as it always has done in the Bible for the Jew. And what Moses felt was here was the opportunity for someone who went through that stage, and that stage didn't disappear. With being a convert doesn't mean that he suddenly forgets his past or he's told to forget his past. Those assets he brought with him. And those assets did not include, as we shall shortly learn, Lashon Hara. Within that portion of Beha'alotcha, of Numbers, chapter 10, we also read there that Miriam, the brother of Moses, was punished because of evil tongue. Evil tongue seems to be the trait of Jewish people all the way through the Bible, and maybe all the way through to our present day. In Shlach Lecha, when the Jews went to explore or spy out the land of Israel, they too came back, says the Zohar, with Lashon Hara, And therefore, this portion of the week called Shlach Lecha, the portion concerning itself with the spies, follows immediately that section which dealt with the Lashon Hara, with the evil tongue of Miriam. They were connected one with each other. And now here was Miriam, prophetess, beautiful family, brother the high priest, another brother the leader of Israel. And how can she succumb to that kind of malicious Lashon Hara? The answer is that while she had attained and achieved those higher levels of consciousness of which only the Jew can achieve, nevertheless, the liability of the desire to receive, of always finding fault, which is what Lashon Hara is all about. Finding fault, Lashon Hara, incidentally, does not mean malicious slander, which is not true. Lashon Hara deals with that which is true, but not for the sake of sharing information, because it is obvious that if an employer is about to hire an individual and he has a friend who was a former employer of this individual, and he asks, what does he know about him? He says, well, I know the reason I fired him was because he stole. Would that be considered Lashon Hara? And the answer is, depending on the intent of that former employer. Was it just to fix him, get even with him, or bury him? Or was it for the sake of sharing information? We shall learn that these Meraglim, according to the Zohar, and these were chieftains, all of them, and we shall explore it more thoroughly, they had only one thing in mind: their own personal esteem. And therefore, when they came back with the slanderous report concerning Israel, they were punished along with the rest of the nation of Israel who went along with them. Why did they all go along with them? Because instinctively, while they weren't present, they hadn't explored the land of Israel. And here came back 10 people of the 12 who had almost everything evil to say about the land of Israel, and they all agreed. No one questioned. They believed. 10 people. There should have been one who should get up beside Caleb, and Yoshua, the two other spies who came up, who tried to present the better side of the picture. But the negative side of the picture was immediately accepted by the entire nation of Israel, because that comes from this intrinsic characteristic called Jew. The desire to receive for oneself alone is always present. It always raises its ugly head, and it requires a great deal of restriction, which the Jew, obviously, from the point of view of the Torah, never had, and we are discussing the Dor Deya, as both the Talmud and the Zohar expresses the definition of the people of the Exodus. They were the most advanced, knowledgeable, and achieving levels of consciousness of which no other generation that followed would have achieved other than in the age of Aquarius. And yet, these thinking people, Dor Deya, immediately grasped the negativity of the land of Israel, the same way as Miriam. So, when it came to Jethro, he felt that this intrinsic characteristic would not affect Jethro, and therefore he could weigh things as they are. He would be the eyes. What does it mean, the eyes? He would not be prejudicial on any subject, as Moshe noticed with the Jews from the moment they were in Egypt. The hard time he had in Egypt, and certainly the hard times he had with this nation of Israel, following day by day this expression of the characteristic of negativity, which is so ugly from the point of view of the Torah, that if I wasn't Jewish, I could say I'm an anti-Semite, and I would become an anti-Semite if this is what the Bible presents as a description of the Jew. This, unfortunately or fortunately, was what Moshe had planned on. And what does he say? Lo elech, I won't go. I want to return to my country. We are speaking of a high-level soul. The Zohar says, as well as the Ari, that Jethro was an incarnation of one of the levels of consciousness of Cain. He had returned for the purpose of amending the sin of Cain. There were three people, three individuals, and the reason we say three, because in every individual concerning this mundane world, we all have three levels of consciousness. They have code names referred to as Malchut, or as crude spirit, Ze'ir Anpin, as spirit, and Neshama, which is Binah, soul. These are three levels of consciousness, the highest of which is Binah. Three people return in this one generation to amend the three categories of Cain in his sin, and they were Jethro, Cain in the soul level of Cain, then came Korach, who followed the portion, again, a description of people who stirred up trouble, Korah, and the Egyptian whom Moses slew in Egypt. These three people came back to amend Cain. The only one who actually succeeded was Jethro. The only one who succeeded was Jethro. Korah did not succeed. Neither did the Egyptian that Moses slew in Egypt.
He was what, in a level of nefesh?
Oh, Jethro? No, nefesh, neshama.
Oh, he was already in the
That's right. That's right. He was to tackle the most difficult aspect of Cain's correction. And he was successful. And therefore, being a very high spiritual conscious individual, we are told by the Zohar that he returned to his land because he was going to seek out souls that he knew were Jewish. And when we speak, again, I don't want to dwell on this subject because we've discussed it on many occasions, and that is, Jew only means one thing. It is that individual. He could be in the body of a Jew, and he could be in the body of a non-Jew. But it's that individual who has the greatest intensity of a desire to receive. That is what we call Jew. Now, whether one is born Jew or not born Jew does not preclude, like Rabbi Akiva, who came through Gerim. Why? And we once discussed, why did he have to come through converts? And who was Rabbi Akiva? That the Talmud says in Tractate Shabbat, that when Moses was chosen to be the leader of Israel, to be the messenger, the channel by which revelation would take place, Moses says, but there is someone of a higher level of consciousness than me, and that was Rabbi Akiva. And whatever the discourse was and why he wasn't chosen is not for our discussion now. But Rabbi Akiva was destined to arrive as a Jew by virtue of another route, the route of non-Jews, because of the similar explanation that there is something in what is called Jew, but he was Jewish. He was Jewish, but he would also get the taste of not being Jewish. And of not being Jewish, while that could sound very revolting, nevertheless, I defy anyone to explain how Moses, the leader of this nation of Israel, and who achieved a level of consciousness that in this very same portion, and it is not in chapter 12, including within this the story of Miriam and her slander on Moses. What does the Lord say? My servant Moses is not so. He is trusted in all my house. With him do I speak mouth to mouth. Nobody else. Only Moses. He was a trusted servant. Because, and why was he a trusted servant? Because also in this portion of Beha'alotcha, it says suddenly, like out of nowhere, that Moshe, Aish Moshe Anav Ma'od, he was a very humble person. And the Zohar explains, what does it mean humble? Moses is writing how humble he was. Obviously, he's not showering himself with some praise, but rather that Moses was a total channel without any form of desire to receive for oneself alone. He was a pure channel without any adulteration of a desire to receive for oneself alone. That's what the word anav meant. He no longer represented the I for himself. He had completely canceled out the I, which is the essence of what Jew is, the epitome of I. So all within this same portion, Moses then asked him to come. And he said no. And maybe he felt that he would accomplish more outside the land or the nation of Israel, because there were other souls, as Moses before him went to take souls that were not in bodies of Jews, meaning those who were born Jewish, and he tried to speed up the process, grab those Jews in non-Jewish bodies and turn them into the soul with a Jewish body. But you know what that produced? Bedlam, the golden calf. Because the Jewish soul with the Jewish body, states the Torah, is a menace. I'm not saying this, but this is the explanation. Now, we can gloss over this and forget it. And maybe that's why we shouldn't learn the Zohar. He is too critical of us. But again, I think he was Jewish. And so we can't accuse him of being anti-Semitic. And when he said, I want to go back, Moses then turns around again and says, but the ultimate is still going to be to transform or create the transformation of the Jew in the Jewish body. While you may have an easier job, an easier task of drawing out those Jewish souls in non-Jewish bodies, but nevertheless, help me out, because I've got a mess here. And he thought that with the support of Jethro, and another factor, that like Eliezer before him, he could be a trusted servant. He could be a trusted servant. And I believe that could kind of clear up this little incident. And then we turn to the most devastating aspect of the description of the Jewish people in the Bible, and that is chapter 13 of Numbers. Chapter 13 of Numbers. It says, Shlach Lecha Anashim v'yaturu et Eretz Canaan. And the Lord told Moses, send for you. Now, unfortunately, in the English translation, as it is the case with many translations, where there is an apparent difficulty in translation, it's simply skipped over, because it says in the English translation, verse 2 in chapter 13, send thou men that they may spy out the land of Canaan. It doesn't say, send thou men, or Moses, send men. It says, Shlach Lecha, for you. Send people for you. For you. Did Moses need to know what was going on in Israel? Couldn't he have this kind of being in the state of consciousness that the Lord says, I have spoken to Moses face to face? Are we to understand that Moses needed spies to go do his exploration about the land of Israel? Wouldn't that indicate that maybe Moses didn't trust the Lord? Because we just read in chapter 11 of Numbers, what did Moses tell Jethro? Come with us, for you shall also participate in the goodness, in the good land that is awaiting us. He himself pleaded with Jethro to share in that kind of holy land. And now the Lord is telling Moshe, send people so they can spy out the land for you. Why did Moses need that? And the verse and the chapter goes on to state the names of these 12 people who are going to be the 12 spies. And it says, when it refers to, in verse 10, verse 10, 11, it says when it comes to the tribe of Joseph, it says, and to the tribe of Joseph, Lemate Menashe, one of the sons of Joseph was Menashe. Now, for those of you who don't recall the formation of the 12 tribes of Israel, you know that there were 12 sons of Jacob. Within those 12 sons of Jacob, there was also included the third son, Levi, and Joseph. Those were the 12 sons. Now, after Jacob's blessing upon Joseph, he said, from now on, your two sons would be part of the nation of Israel. And so suddenly we have 13 tribes. If the two are replacing Joseph, and if Levi was included, there would be 13. However, the Levites were ultimately, and that was known in advance, were taken out of the division of Israel amongst the 12 tribes. He did not receive a portion in Israel. And it says in this verse 11, Lamate Yosef, Lamate Menashe, that the tribe of Joseph, it says, was the tribe of Menashe, one of the sons. However, when it comes to the other son, it says Lamate Ephraim, who was the other son of Joseph. It does not say Livnei Yosef. And the Ari answers, how come it doesn't say the tribe of Joseph here too? And he says we're discussing Hoshea bin Nun, and that Moshe instilled within Yehoshua, whose name ultimately became Yehoshua, Joshua, instilled within him a spark of his own consciousness. And therefore, he underwent a transformation. While he was alive, underwent the transformation that he was now, while he was still considered to be the tribe of Ephraim, but in this case, he was also going to represent the tribe of Levi. In other words, Moses, who was part of the tribe of Levi, instilled with him part of the consciousness of the Levite. These 12 people went and were instructed by Moses as follows. In verse 17 of chapter 13, it says, and Moses sent them out to spy the land of Canaan, and said unto them, get you up here in the south, and go up into the mountains. See the land. See what's going on over there. And I'm skipping over to go quickly to verse 20, where he says, what the land is, whether it is fat or lean, whether there is wood therein, not wood, but whether there are trees or not. And if there are trees, bring back some of the trees from the land of Israel. Again, does that mean that you can have a land of milk and honey without trees? Possible? How is that? What's that? For milk and honey you don't need.
No land without trees. No such a land. Even in the desert there aren't trees.
I would doubt that very much. I would doubt that very much, because milk obviously comes from a cow, and I can't see a cow. What's that?
Cows need vegetation.
And without vegetation, I couldn't see cows becoming nourished and giving milk. And bees, you know what happens with bees? Without trees, they just aren't bees, right? So I think Moshe also understood this process. And if he did, why is he asking if there are trees there? As if he didn't know. The answer to this part is rather simple. Those of you who attend the morning session, and for those of you who have been attending these sessions, I guess you won't find it difficult either. And that is because we know, in the physicist has already explained for us, that there are two realities. There is a reality. They don't explain it maybe this way, but there is a reality that deals with consciousness, and then there is the physical reality. The physical reality, from a Kabbalistic point of view, is a complete illusionary reality. Does that mean the table, or the chair, or a cup, or anything of a physical nature is illusionary? The answer is yes. So says the scientist, because he has placed the label of uncertainty on all of physics. So it is not only I that declare that all physical reality is illusionary. But yet it exists. It exists. It is something that you can't escape from. However, people who have raised their consciousness just a little are aware that thought consciousness is really what makes things move. In other words, they do not believe that after an 84-story building has been constructed, that building just by itself became a structure of 84 stories. They believe that a thought intelligence went into the makings and structuring of this building. But for those who observe the building, might forget, and especially if he's Jewish, he forgets what happened yesterday. So he might even forget that there was an architect, there might have been an entrepreneur, there might have been a financier, there might have been what we would consider to be 90% that went into the structure of that building, not the mortar. So now suddenly he is faced with the physical reality, and that becomes reality. When the Lord told Moses, send for you, why did he say for you? Why did Moses need the experience of these 12 people entering Israel? Because that's what it says. While if you have a translation of the Bible in English, or in French, or in Spanish, or in German, you will observe that they omit the word lecha, for you, but rather shlach anashim, send people. But the verse is very distinct and clear. For you, it was only for Moses. And the reason for God telling Moses to send these people, whose purpose was only for Moses, was, if you recall, just to repeat briefly, the aspect or the condition of Adam before the sin and after the sin. We have again repeated on many occasions that Adam before the sin connected with the tree of life. What does that mean? He connected with the reality, the real reality of life. And when he was in that state of consciousness, he no longer had the necessity of eating or drinking or sleeping, but the thought consciousness made everything happen. It also makes things happen on a physical reality level that we live in, like that building of 84 stories. The real reality is all that preceded the actual construction. All of this is thought consciousness. Adam, in that position, could arrange the physical reality without going through the physical action of eating, of drinking, of sleeping. After the sin, which means when he ate from the tree of knowledge, good and evil, he then became subject to the aspect of illusion. Good and evil only means reality, And evil means only one thing: illusion. Because, again, on many occasions, we have clarified that good cannot be good for everyone, and evil cannot be evil for everyone. Very simply stated, what might be good for me, obviously, could be bad for someone else. So what does good and evil mean? I mean, if I buy stocks in a stock market and it goes up, there are those who have sold short. So in every given situation, there is good and evil. So what does it mean, good and evil? Is it an abstract term, or is it very definitive? And the Zohar explains good and evil not meaning what is evil, because sometimes if we get a knock over our heads, it knocks some sense into us, we say. And that beating could be evil, but it's only relative. When something can be ascribed to relativity, it is already illusionary. Because if I can't say it's good or bad, because it could be good and it could be bad at the same time, that is what is referred to as uncertainty. How do I know whether it's good, and how do I know if it's evil? This is the problem that faces all of mankind. If we all knew what was good, but good for everyone, and if we all knew what was evil, but evil for everyone, the problems that exist would not exist. So the Zohar puts one word into it, the word of illusion. The Eitz HaChaim was the reality level. The reality level. Moses had achieved a total conscious level of reality while he was still in this physical form. And as we said before about the Jew, that despite all of his desire to receive for the sake of sharing, fortunately or unfortunately, the aspect of desire to receive is part of his characteristic. With Moshe, when he spoke face to face, what it means, there was no illusion. That aspect where corporeal reality becomes suddenly an important factor in our lives, with Moses it became non-existent. He was totally attached to and totally related to one aspect, the aspect of reality. That's what it means, face to face. Moses, being in that reality, being of total light, knew that if he came into Israel, and if the Jew had not yet achieved a level of consciousness of reality, in other words, they no longer would succumb to the aspect of illusion, no longer would they be subject to illusion, then Moses knew that he could enter the land of Israel. When he questioned if there were trees or not, he was not questioning the physical reality, but he was questioning whether they would observe the Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, meaning reality, or would they succumb to the physical illusionary reality. Then what would happen? He would be considered like he is the sun, and the Jews would be the candle, and they could no longer express themselves. There would be no free will. It's like the candle, which does not express itself when the sun shines upon it. It doesn't express itself because it is so overwhelmed. And if Moses entered the land of Israel, the Jew, with all of his desire to receive for oneself alone, all of his illusionary aspects, would be like the candle. He would be so overwhelmed by reality that his free choice, free will, would be taken away from him. So when Moses sent these spies, it was for him. Moses wanted to know whether he was going to enter Israel, whether he was going to have the opportunity to be there. How was he going? And did he know if there were trees there? Of course he knew there were trees. But Moses in the Torah never never refers to the physical reality. It likes to, in all terms, refer to thought consciousness. That's why in discussing of the Jew, it gives such a horrible description, but in essence, the description is only to teach us what the Jew is made up of. What's the stuff that makes him tick over and above anybody else? So when he asked if there are trees, he was asking if they saw reality, then he knew he would enter the land of Israel because they had achieved that level of consciousness. But if they came back with the physical reality, the illusionary reality, then he knew that they had not raised their consciousness. They had remained in the level of illusion. Now, if he would come into Israel with his overwhelming light, like the sun, they had no free choice any longer. That was the question that he was raising. And therefore, there was never a question on the part of Moses whether he trusted God, this land of milk and honey, of whether there is in essence milk and honey, whether there is trees. It was never the question. While you might say, but that's the way it discusses this portion of chapter 13. He says, what is the land about? Are there giants there? Are there other aspects of liability? If they would come back and say yes, as they did, then he says, wait a second. Did you learn that you can split a Red Sea? Did you learn that mind could be over matter? Did you learn that the illusionary reality was not something we had to be governed by? Did you learn anything? Now, up until now, you haven't. You haven't learned anything. But for whatever reason, and we might ask that question and raise it, which I didn't raise before, I mean, why now? I mean, first of all, there's a track record. What would even convince Moses that they were going to become different kinds of Jews? Why would they come back with another story other than Lashon Hara? If Miriam, in chapter 12, just preceding this incident, succumbed to that illusionary reality, why would these people wind up somehow different or not true to character? There was a characteristic. There was a track record of what spells out Jew. Now here Moses thinks suddenly they will come into the land of Israel, and suddenly they're going to come back with another level of consciousness, which at that moment they weren't there. No Jew was there. And now they were going to come back. They were going to be transformed, maybe by their entering the land of Israel. It might have something to do with that. And other than that, I can't think of a reason of why Moses would assume that they would not come back with a negative report. If that is the characteristic, if we have to go through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, to learn, we need all the study, a big voluminous book called the Bible, the Torah, that teaches us the intrinsic characteristic of the Jew is desire to receive for oneself alone, which limits his vision, which limits his awareness. That is the payment. That is the result of desire to receive for oneself alone. He becomes limited because all he can do is see himself. He kind of creates a little inner circle, inner boundary around himself, and therefore nothing else exists for him. Why would he come back with another report? Okay, we'll have an intermission.
Portion.